let's see how it's going. As always, if the internet is indeed working, has all this worked? So, hello everyone, welcome to this live stream. That is, I realize, an ad, a pre-roll ad on YouTube. But hello and welcome to the first live stream of the year. My name is David, as always, the curly, ginger-haired host with the beard. And I realize now that people have, people who don't know me personally use that as an identifier when, talking to people that do know me. To be like, oh, do you know David? It's like, which one? It's like, with the curly hair, the beard. He has a beard because I mention it so often. I realize that is what I do. Apparently, by the way, that is that's a conscious choice. Is to constantly describe myself in some small little way. Back when I started this over 4 years ago, I was like, how do I make this accessible? How do I do things that are accessible other than just subtitles, for example? And so I asked a friend who does some accessibility consultancy, and she was like, visual descriptions. Just put an audio description every now and again. So the very first video I did, I gave myself a full, proper physical description. And since then, just to make it nice and smooth, it's yep, just a brief indicator of what I'm like as a person visually, because you don't know if a person who's blind or has not the best eyesight, you don't know what they can and cannot envision, and so I've just been told it was useful, and I've stuck with it since. And I've always been a bit awkward being okay, random new person that I'm interviewing, let's begin, introduce yourself with a brief physical description. And oh my goodness, the amount of brief physical descriptions that I've had to cut down when interviewing new people. I give them examples. I'm just one or two things. That's it. And oh, okay, so I'm a middle-aged Caucasian man with thinning hair, and I'm wearing a blue shirt with these sort of thin-rimmed glasses, and behind me is blah blah blah. I'm you're just you're just a middle-aged bald man. Just to go with that. That's all we need for this introduction. But hello, people who are watching. What's the lag on this? Thinning hair and I'm wearing a blue... Wonderful. Okay. So, yes. Hello. Welcome to the live stream. Do you have any questions about things? As long as it's not to do with the difference between the Treasurer and the Finance Minister. A question that I was asked 3 years ago, and I keep forgetting to look it up. Why? Look, we're not going to go into that. That's right. I don't know everything yet, and it's my Achilles heel. Put me on one of those game shows where it's like the Einstein factor, where it's all about the contestant's specific interest, and oh my goodness, all of a sudden I'm going to get what's the difference between the Treasurer and the Finance Minister? And I'll be like, sorry. Hi, Jason. Hi, Blake. Hi, everyone in the chat watching. Were you about to ask about the difference between the Finance Minister and the Treasurer? Yeah. Anyway, look, while I wait for some questions, let me tell you about some recent things that have been happening. I went to the UK and other places back in September and October for a long belated honeymoon. It was wonderful, and I did 4 different Parliament tours, and I would have done more if I had time, and my wife did not feel like she was being dragged around. A couple people we went to the Isle of Man, which is not in the UK, which a couple of people from the UK were very confused about when we went to the Parliament. Hi, Elizabeth. How you doing? Feel free to ask me questions. Yes, where was I? Literally, I've forgotten already. Oh, yes, we went to the Isle of Man, and like we went to like Peel Castle, and the guy like at the ticket booth or whatever, like making some conversation, and it's like, yeah, my wife like spent some of her childhood here, like we're revisiting it, and he made a joke like, oh yeah, and you've been dragged along. I'm like, no, I really want to be here because it sounds fun. I've never been here, and it's great that my wife is having all this nostalgia and enjoyment, and I get to be part of that. Instead of just listening to a story, I get to like actually physically be at the places that she's referring to. And so like some people are like, oh, you drag your wife along? No, she loved it. Not nearly as much as me, obviously, but you know, we enjoy seeing each other have joy. That's what it's like. None of this boomer nonsense, no ball and chain. Anyway, so Liz asked favourite tour. Oh gosh, they're all different. So I went to the Palace of Westminster. That's the UK Parliament. The Scottish Parliament. Not the North. I didn't have time for the Northern Ireland one. Went to the Republic of Ireland Parliament, and then Tynwald and the Isle of Man. And they're all different. They're all interesting and different. The Palace of Westminster is an actual palace. Like, it's huge and ornate, and like everywhere you look there's just like stuff. I got a book somewhere recently. A good friend found this in an op shop while we were hanging out, and it's got stuff about the Palace of Westminster, and unfortunately I can't take photos during the tour, but like it's just so ornate and beautiful. So that was fun. It wasn't really like this is just ridiculous. Like this is, you just walk through this just to go to work. It wasn't so like educational about like the mechanics of the Westminster system, which as a nerd I'm like, I would have enjoyed that more. But like it's more of a tour of the building, which has so much art. Pardon me. Honestly, Tynwald Parliament is so interesting. It's tricameral. It has 3 chambers, and I don't understand why. I genuinely don't. I can explain to you how it works. I don't understand the reasoning for it. So there's the House of Keys. That's the lower house, so like your House of Representatives or your Legislative Assembly, and that's the legislative house. Like that's where like the ideas are introduced, and like it has legislative power. And a lot of parliaments in Europe have appointed upper houses, and over time it was like, well, these people are appointed, why do they have all this legislative power? And so like the House of Lords and the Legislative Council in Tynwald, for example, like they've just had their sort of legislative power and authority sort of taken away, and they just effectively become appointed standing committees, just like for different ways to nominate it. Like the same with like the Republic of Ireland, it's dedicated seats for different industries or something. I can't explain that one very well. And like they didn't make them like actual legislative elective bodies. Like Australia had appointed legislative councils, upper houses, and went, that's not democratic. So Queensland abolished theirs, and then all the other states went, we'll make them elected. So like the House of Keys introduces a bunch of stuff, sends it to the Legislative Council. The Legislative Council can't really do much with it. Like it makes recommendations, but it still does have to approve it. And then the next step is like the Court of Tynwald, which is not a court, it's not a judicial body, it's a legislative body. It's a joint sitting chamber. Effectively, all legislation goes through a joint sitting. But for it to pass, you can't have a simple majority of all the members present in the chamber. You need a majority from both chambers. So like the majority of the members' House of Keys and the majority of the members of the Legislative Council together, even though they just passed it in their respective chambers. But they do it again. Only in this case, the president is presiding over it, not the speaker. So the speaker gets to just be a free reign individual independent MP as opposed to a presiding officer in the House of Keys, where they have to be a bit more impartial. And so it's like, yeah, we get the speaker to talk, but why are we doing this a third time? Very beautiful. And they also have some gifts from Australia. They have like one of the presiding officer's seats, I think, is actually made out of kangaroo fur. Kangaroo leather. Hey, Australia and Isle of Man. Some interesting stuff. Okay. I'm sorry, I've gone like so much time on this question. I love it. I'll get back to it. So Blake asks, favorite book that I'm currently reading. Tiberius with a Telephone. It's a biography of Billy McMahon, the 20th Prime Minister of Australia, who was allegedly gay. He wasn't gay. His biographer thinks he wasn't gay. Bowman, a biographer who tried to help him while he was alive, write the definitive autobiography, and was like, wow, this guy's... Insert a lot of negative adjectives here. He also was like, yeah, this frivolous and nonsense. But, like, it's a fascinating thing of, like, he was accused of being gay for, like, decades in his career and still managed to, like, make his way through, but was clearly frustrated about it. And it was this weird sort of, like, open dig at him, like, even in the media, like, euphemisms, like, he was a confirmed bachelor until he was it his 50s or 60s? Like, he was old. Like, his son, by the way, is Julian McMahon, the guy who played Dr. Doom in the early 2000s Fantastic Four films. Yes, so, yeah, I think it's just really interesting as a biography, because, like, I mean, one, it's really well written, and two, it's diving into, like, Billy McMahon was known as the worst Prime Minister Australia's ever had. He was deeply unliked, for many reasons, not because he was, not because people sort of tried to use homophobia, to, like, just insult him, like you would, like, in high school. Like, he actually was a liar and a manipulative individual who was just really not good at socializing. I feel like he was neurodivergent. Like, he didn't understand tone or sarcasm. Like, he would take things very literally. He would never turn off. Like, he would just obsess about politics. Like, he would, like, people didn't like him. Like, people in the Liberal Party did not like him, but he did the job really well. So, like, Menzies, who, like, just found him like a contemptible little squirt or something, I think that's the quote, like, he was a minister for over 20 years, because it's like, well, he obsessively does this, and, like, you give a ministry to him and he will just work at it. He will do the work. He will never be a lazy minister. I'm pretty sure politics was his special interest. Like, he would call people up at, like, 2, 3 in the morning to be like, I need, like, information about, like, X report. Like, he just would not learn how to socialize properly. All he cared about was just being a minister. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I recommend that book. For other books, non-political, then I'm gonna check Goodreads for that one. What did I recently read that I enjoyed that wasn't politics? I do read things that aren't just politics. I also read poetry. It's a poetry book. It's loading. Lord of the Butterflies by Andrea Gibson was great. And then I also have a few John Swartzwelder books, because he's so absurdly funny. And I haven't read them in, like, several years, so I just picked up one, and it's so good. The John Swartzwelder wrote, like, a ton of, like, the best classic Simpsons episodes. Like, he left the show in, like, season 10 or 11, and there hasn't been a good Simpsons episode since. So, yeah, look up John Swartzwelder. He has, like, The $1 Million Policeman, and which I just read. Very silly, absurdist fiction. Yeah. What's on the Auspol Explained agenda for 2024? Back to basics. I keep saying this and thinking it, but it has come to my attention that teachers do actually use some of my videos in class to explain things, and I have not really structured them in terms of length or like relevancy for a lot of the high school curriculum. I can explain things relevant to the high school curriculum, but my interest has been like, oh, let's just talk about like this thing, and I'll just talk about that thing, and it's like, okay, no. I've sat down, I've written a bunch of like bullet points of like, okay, they've never done a video about the separation of powers. It's time to explain in basic terms the difference between the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. And the executive and legislature, how they have a bit of a Venn diagram where they kiss and they cuddle a little bit. The judiciary is like, no, I'm not touching that. Only a court is a court, and don't you dare try and interfere with what a court does. Yeah, remarkably never explained that. So in classic fashion, I sat down and I started writing it, and then I looked at it and went, this is too much. Like, I find it very interesting. Like, part of me really, like, I really need to have just the focus and dedication to be like, here is the simple explainer for like your year 8s, 9s, and here is the more advanced explainer for your like 11, 12s university people, because year 8s just want to understand what a minister is and then what the court does. They don't need to understand about a historic like the wheat case. I think it's called the wheat case, some reference to wheat in it, about the like the Commonwealth versus something. I think it was New South Wales. I'm really poorly remembering it, but basically like the Interstate Commission, which is section 100 and something of the Constitution, why doesn't that exist anymore? Well, the answer is because the Commonwealth tried to sort of frame it in a way where it would go beyond arbitration and would end up, in the High Court's opinion, having sort of seemingly judicial power. And the High Court went, you can't do that. That simply can't happen. It's not a court, and only a court is a court. And the separation of powers in the Constitution demands that you simply cannot have this body do what would appear to be judicial functions. So it basically very much limited what the Interstate Commission could do, and the government went, well, that's useless, and just didn't bother to ever appoint anyone new to it, and its terms expired, and then they just made some other statutory body. And so even though it's in the Constitution, it is effectively abolished. It is effectively a dead letter because it is incompatible with the sort of structures of the rest of the Constitution. And that is very interesting that I could go into more detail about. But year 8s are like, what? At that point, they're like, oh, so a minister is like an important person, a senior member of the government who manages government departments. Okay, I understand that one. I can think of examples to put that into more tangible things. Anyway, that's yes. Yes, Blake, a Billy McMahon video would be in the works. I just have to whittle down like 4,000 plus words into something a bit more structured. It's turning into one of those just like surprise like video essays where like, okay, this is the premise, and this is where you learn a little bit more information, and then all of a sudden halfway through you've just taken a 90-degree like left turn, and you find yourself learning way more about something else entirely until we circle back and you're like, and that's why Billy McMahon was not gay. I'm very excited. I spent a lot of time writing it, and I'm going to spend a little time rewriting it to be better, and hopefully watchable. I don't, like, it's always like, I find this very interesting, and then I'm like, do other people? It's, you know? Hi. Oh yeah, there's more people. There's not many people watching, but hi, Max. Welcome to the chat. Follow me. Can I please explain how the Queensland gerrymandering of Sir Joe worked? Wasn't always like that. It was established by the Country Party. The answer is no. I can't explain that. Next question. I've wondered about it. I'm like, huh? Look, I'm going to assume that it's because there was not an independent statutory body like the AEC or the state-based equivalents. Like the AEC, for example, came into existence in the 80s, and I assume it was simply just a legislative, like electoral boundaries were just prescribed electorally. So they were prescribed through legislation, which you get sometimes for like upper houses, for example. I think. Oh no, I haven't. Look, I have read like that. Like there is where like they're setting up like. Look, the only frame of reference I have is Western Australia. So, old legislation for setting up like the Legislative Council for Western Australia, for example, they're like there will be the following districts of Fremantle and Perth, and there will be 2 representatives for those districts, and then there'll be one for like Geraldton or whatever, but it's saying in the legislation there is one, so we are effectively having this sort of additional overrepresentation just in one area because the legislation says, yeah, this is more of an important population area. So I assume that really the Queensland legislation was like, okay, so the variance in what how many people need to be in an electorate is different to like what is defined as a country area to like a city area. So like electorates are meant to be similar amount of people in areas, but naturally you can't have exactly 25,000 people in this circle and 25,000 people in this circle. So there is a sort of a wiggle room, a margin of however many thousand people, and there was enough wiggle room and a margin of error for how many people could be in one electorate versus another, to the point where the country areas that have less people, you end up being legally allowed to shove in an extra electorate or 2 or 3 or whatever, so that the country gets more representation through funky math, and therefore you get greater national strongholds. But also with Queensland, it has more of a rural like population than other states, especially Western Australia. So the Nationals would have a large like voting base and country body of people to represent anyway. In Queensland, when the Liberals and Nationals fused, the Nationals were actually larger. The Nationals in Queensland were actually the larger of the bodies, whereas other states, it's very much the Liberals in the metro areas larger as a presence than the Nationals in the rural presence, except for in Western Australia currently, where the Liberals only have 2 in the lower house. But that's the idea, I think. Maybe, don't quote me on that, but that is... I love how I was like confidently, no, here's my wild, educated guess that maybe, I don't know. Anyway. Gosh, it takes me so long to answer these questions. I'm so sorry. I say constantly forever. Okay, so any scope for a retrospective on the voice referendum, or would that border on too contentious? It would border on too contentious. I'm not going to do that or comment on it. As neutral as possible, and unfortunately, a lot of people did not perceive me being neutral as accurate, or take it that way. I had a lot of people say that I was peddling government propaganda simply because I described the voice as an advisory body, which is a truth that is literally described in the text of the proposed amendment itself, if you actually understand the legalese, that it is an advisory body and just an advisory body. And so I got so much hostility during the voice, and I'm not even an indigenous person, so I can't fathom how awful it would have been for indigenous people, and I am not going to discuss it further, because from the woodwork, people just come and harass me. And what could I possibly say that, one, won't offend people who don't like it, and two, what can I possibly say other than that? Like, if we can't even agree onto what the voice actually was, what commentary is there that isn't just, we can't agree what the voice was? And at that point, it really feels like it just trying to attack or alienate people, and that's not the point. People voted for and against the voice. Everyone is welcome to this channel because politics is for everyone. I just wish that there wasn't a vocal subset of people who really, really wanted to make people's time really unpleasant without actually engaging with or discussing the politics of what was going on. Okay. Thank you, Elisha, for enjoying Extraordinary Auspol last year. My debut play, for those who did not get to see it. Any chance of anything similar in the works this year? Look, I've talked to the producer and director and been like, hey, we could put the play on again sometime. It is one of those things where it's like, I don't know. We'll see what we do with it. However, right, it was basically like, I had basically all those stories pre-prepared. I wrote like a script that was like 2.5 hours long, and we just had to cut because I want to turn this into a book. The whole idea was like, I've been thinking about this book for ages, that it's just a series of interesting and peculiar and funny things that happened in Australian political history, and like eventually I was just like, I'll just put it on as a play as well. Like, it gives me a creative outlet. This book won't be done for ages, and it also motivated me to actually pick up the book and do it again. And so I've been working on that, and I don't know if I'll finish it this year. I really hope I do. The problem with it is that I just keep finding new things. Like, I sat down to edit like the first draft, and created a second draft, and then most of the content in the second draft is entirely new stories not in the first draft. There's just so much weird stuff out there in history, and I'm just combing through it. So really, ideally, hopefully, I would like this year to have a complete draft of my book that I've wanted to write for years, and fingers crossed, everyone, follow me up on that book. Be like, how's that book going? Are you finishing the book? How's research going? The answer is extensive and endless. So I don't think I've ever actually mentioned that I'm writing a book before publicly. Well, on this particular topic. Like, yes, surprise. So you all get to know in advance that that's a thing that will ideally happen one day. That is my dream. A dream. We all like to dream. The book will be one of the many hundreds of books on my bookshelf. All these books are my books, but a book with my name on it. Okay. Whoa. Gosh. Anyway. What was his take? What? Never mind. Yes, okay. I've forgotten what I was saying. Fiona mentions teaching children that they should enroll to vote before they're 18. Yes. Yeah, you can enroll to vote at age 16 and 17 to be done and ready when it is your time to vote when you're 18. Look, I'm not one who goes around talking about electoral reform because it's not my place, but hey, I think it'd be a cool and good fun idea if, like, candidates had to write in and produce like a little, like, 200 word or 150 word little bio of themselves with a picture, and then that becomes a bit of a booklet or pamphlet. Because, like, you're looking at the names, you're like, there's so many of these, I don't know who you are, right? And, like, yeah, you want to do some due diligence, but once you get past, like, the first 2 or 3 or 4, like, even me, I'm like, I don't know who all these people are, right? And like they do it for local government elections. I mean, admittedly, that's like 7 people vying for some position, or at least it is in my ward. Like, but it would just be handy, like if I'm like, oh, okay, what's the distinction between these two people? And like, you can't go on too much of like a rant with only like 100, 200 words, but like it does give you like a brief description. You know, like if it's like, I'm such and such, and I'm environmentally focused and left wing, and then like I'm such and such, and I stand up for traditional values, and I'm conservative, and I believe that like these are like the family structures that we should promote. And you're like, I understand which person that I like more. And then one person goes, I think that like we should reject the left or right spectrum. You're like, okay, this also gives me an idea where you are. You're either a libertarian, centrist, or like trying to pretend that you're not one way politically aligned or the other. Maybe we could just have that. Like, that would be so useful. I feel like that would be so useful. You wouldn't have to necessarily mail it out to everyone like the AEC does with like the yes and no pamphlets, but at least have, you know, you could rock up to a polling booth and there would just be a couple of them, like reusable. Like you like, not like how to vote cards, like not like that, because that's wastage. That's serious wastage. Please don't take a how to vote card. Like some people just take it to like, yes, I like you, I'm going to support this party, and you take it and you like, you already know that you want to vote for them. Don't take away their like paper material that they've just printed and spent ink on, and like you're just taking party funds away from them, and you're producing a piece of recyclable, ideally recyclable garbage. Like anyway, that's my one electoral reform idea. Just more information. That and the Robson rotation, maybe. Fingers crossed, who knows? I don't know. To be fair, look, I do like the Robson rotation, but I do have to defer to a talk that I got to be at where Anthony Green commented that the Robson rotation is interesting and good, but it only really is practical in smaller, smaller examples. Like Tasmania is not very populated, and neither is the ACT relative to other states, and therefore it's easier to actually know who you're voting for and talking about, and the Robson rotation is more practical as opposed to confusing, but oh well. Anyway, fingers crossed. I do enjoy the creative process. Oh my goodness, yes, it's such a good bit. Thank you for enjoying the play and saying the one thing you still remember is the bit where everyone stopped to tell people to enroll to vote. I love that bit so much. The first night I had a bunch of politics nerd friends come and support me, and they lost it at that. Is so good. Okay, for context, everyone, it's a story about the Victorian mace getting stolen in 1891, and because I love his detail, there's a character, William McClellan, who comes on stage and, like, because there's lots of quick costume changes, there's only 3 actors, including myself, it's like, yep, I'm William McClellan, and I'm the person who once lost an election by only 5 votes. So, remember, kids. And then, like, the lighting just becomes just, like, normal house lights, and, like, everyone just, like, looks at the stage, and in unison it's like, now, remember everyone to enroll to vote. There'll be a QR code in the foyer, which you can scan and take you directly to the AEC website. And it just becomes this so cheesy, direct-to-camera kind of like, hey, kids, voting is fun. Like, but self-aware. Like, it's... Oh, I loved it so much. Oh... One of my favourite original bits. Anyway. Oh, Captain Cringe says that I have the vibe of one cool dude at the library or bookshop. Thank you. I'm so glad that I've cultivated that. You think I'm cool? What? Anyway. What's my take on direct democracy? Not gonna tell ya. it's up to you to decide what your views on democracy are. Adrian asks, what is the Robson rotation? Thank you. Wow, I finally caught up. So, the Robson rotation. So, you go to vote for the Senate, right? The Senate does not have the Robson rotation. So, like, you know, we've got party A, B, C, D, right? So, you know, you've got Greens, your Labour, your Liberal, National, One Nation, etc. Now, the order in which those appear on your ballot is randomized, shuffled, right? So, you know, if you're the kind of lazy person who wants to donkey vote and just go from like left to right, just right, there's going to be a slight amount of votes just from donkey votes to whoever gets the lucky leftmost spot, which happens randomly, right? But parties also have like candidates, star candidates that are like, this is like the incumbent, the person who's currently like in the Senate wants to go for re-election. That's the one that people has the best chance of getting elected. So that person's going to be at the top of the column. And then they're like, we think that we can maybe get a second seat, so our second most popular person gets to be number 2, etc. And then once you get to like 3 and beyond, it's like, well, I don't know, fingers crossed, maybe if we're super popular, or if someone like dies or resigns, we can go down the ticket and that'll be the next person to replace it, right? The Robson rotation randomizes that as well. So, like, you're still in the same polling booth as your friend, for example, but your 2 ballots look different because not only have they randomized the location of where a party appears, they've also randomized the order in which the candidates appear. So, right, basically, if you donkey vote, if literally everyone donkey votes, you're not going to have some statistical weighting to the very first spot because the very first spot is different, right? Which means it encourages you, the voter, to actually think about who you're voting for. Because, like, if you just go da-da-da-da-da, right, you're just sort of effectively randomly selecting someone. But if you, like, okay, there are 6 people or 5 people, whatever, that I want to put my preferences on, however, like, whatever the system works, right? Like, this is in Tasmania, where I believe it's 5 members per electorate. I can't quite recall. Yeah, so, like, you actually have to stop and think, right? And you can't just randomly select it. And because of this, right, well, you don't have necessarily the star person who is going to get all the votes. You really kind of have to campaign a little bit better to have sort of this public recognition, and therefore it also helps independence as well. Because if the public's like really focused on who is actually representing them as an individual, brand recognition of which party you're in becomes less important. It's very much more important who you actually are and how effectively you campaign, because people have to find your name on the ballot and search it out. So I think that's just interesting. It gets rid of donkey voting and encourages more engagement in democracy. However, it also makes it difficult to count, especially the larger the ballot, and also if you don't care about politics, this might be a bit of a like, difficult and discourage you. I don't know. Look, there's pros and cons to all sorts of voting systems. Anyway, so that is the Robson rotation. And Captain Cringe says, this channel is criminally small. Thank you. Hey everyone watching right now, share this with someone else. Please, it would be great. Plans for 2024, reach 15,000 subscribers. I feel like I can do that one pretty easily. I don't know if I can reach 16,000, maybe 17, probably not within this year. And I would love, what's the minimum? Like I'm never going to have 1 million subscribers. I know that. I'm never going to be like Friendly Geordie's level of fame, because, you know, it's not as interesting or engaging for the algorithm or people if you don't express like opinions. like hey, this is how the House of Representatives works, and people are like, that's useful, thank you. But if you're like, this party is doing good or this party is doing bad, you're gonna get way more engagement, and that's gonna boost your thing, and that's more shareable and engaging and interesting. So like, I've sort of shot myself in the foot by being like, I'm not gonna do what other people do, and what other people do is better at finding an audience. And I'm not saying that that's bad. Like, yeah, you want to watch things that are interesting, and you want to have your opinions validated or like be persuaded in some way. But that's not what the function and purpose of this is. So I need people to actively care about making it grow, which is not as easy as like, you know, larger audience, more sort of opinionated YouTubers. Because the brand, I'm not a business, because the style and vibe of this is so distinctly different from Friendly Geordies, I will never collaborate with him. But if he wants to tweet a link to this channel and let everyone know that it exists as an independent and separate sort of project that is not in any way thematically like his, I would appreciate the boost in audience. Do not harass that man. Do not tell him to tweet me out. Don't. And you specifically you as an individual share my content in some way, capacity or form. That would be appreciative on a real level. Oh gosh, John Smith, I don't do election predictions. I'm not Anthony Green. Not yet. I've yet to take his skin. What are my opinions on the political compass? Captain Cringe? Yes, I do indeed. Oh wait, sorry. I was thinking of ABC political compass, and you start talking about something about fascism and capitalists, and no, I was thinking of ABC vote compass. It's like, yeah, it's a really useful tool. It is. I mean, it doesn't have like it doesn't have a label in the ABC vote compass that says you're a fascist or you're a communist. It's still useful. Like, if you find yourself in very extreme elements of the right or left, you've got a few things to learn about what those ideologies mean, which sort of like, it's the ABC vote compass is not just a useful tool for like elections, but it's also a useful tool for really just sort of like baby's first guide to political ideology, because, you know, then like, okay, we're going to really simplify this into sort of like economic and social left and right, and what does that mean? Well, we could give you a bit of a lecture about, you know, regulation versus deregulation, private public services and property and blah 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 blah, or we can be like, what are your thoughts on this specific tangible policy? And once you get enough data, it goes, oh, you're there or there or there, and you go, ah, okay, because I want welfare to be increased and I want more environmental protection, I'm more left-leaning, or like I have like dislike things like gay marriage. Oh, I'm more like that's a tangible, that's a actual thing that you can be like, there's an example, and help you understand. Like, I don't, no point does the ABC vote compass go, do you think Mussolini was a good person? And if you go yes, it goes, you're a fascist. Like, it doesn't do that. And to be fair, you probably need to have a little bit more complicated understanding of that ideology to make that. But like, yeah, neat. Where was I? Interesting thing. Oh, hi Fiona. You've never heard of Friendly Geordie, but you have heard of me. Friendly Geordie is like one of the most popular, if not the most popular, like Australian politics YouTuber there is. Like, I think he's bigger than Juice Media. Okay, let's see. He has 1.2 million subscribers, and Juice Media has 978,000. Okay, so basically, for those who don't know who Friendly Geordie is, he also does political commentary, and you will learn very, very quickly, very, very pro-Labour, very, very anti-coalition. So a lot of his content that has very much risen to, like, done well in the algorithm is him being like, the Liberals or Nationals are bad because insert reason here. And that is a valid thing for him to say because that's his opinion, but that's the sort of antagonistic thing that does well to drive engagement, but does not actually teach you specifics about mechanics. Like, he doesn't talk about how voting works. He talks about how he wants elections to turn out because of his personal ideology. And look, honestly, people should be making content like that. Like, how do you think this is social media. Like, if you have like a political stance or thing and you wish more people agreed with you, make content about it. Like, this is like, that is part of how political and democratic participation works. And if you heard that massive crack, that's just my ankle. I'm 31, about to turn 32. So, like, while I don't personally enjoy Friendly Geordies, his sense of humor is just not my thing, really. Like, he is doing something that, like, is obvious and should be a thing that people do, which is talk about their political opinions in a public space and try and influence others. If you disagree with him, try and influence people in a different way. If you agree with him, try and influence people in the same way. Not necessarily making vlogs or sketch comedy, and definitely not any, like, sort of racial humor. That one's a bit iffy, but, like, you know, find a way that your political communication and expression is expressed in a way that works for you and reaches people. And I encourage you to figure out how to do that. Okay. Anyway. Who's doing PR? Thoughts on the party membership requirements. Okay. Hi, Clifton. How you doing? What are my thoughts on the party member requirements? Interesting. Gosh, they recently increased it from 500 to 1,000, didn't they, for the federal government? I don't know about a state-based level. It would vary from state to state. So let's tell you a story about 1989, and it's the first election in the Australian Capital Territory. The requirements to register a party are incredibly low. Someone realizes this, and as a fun joke decides to have the party, the surprise party, the sun-dried ripe tomato party, and the, dreamers awake party. Like, just multiple silly nonsense parties, right? Because to him, that's funny, and it takes a lot of joy out of it for the people who have to count the ballots, because all of a sudden now there's all these preferences, and the ballot is over like a meter long, and it takes like over a month to count it all, and they go, that's not great, and they change the party requirements to be more strict, like, costs more, and you need to have X amount of people like sign up and say, we agree with this party and believe it should be a thing, right? We're not just an organization who believes in X issue, we have X members, and so there is there's a valid reason for having some sort of benchmark, be that monetary or members based, to register a political party, because it disincentivizes people having a stupid, silly time at the expense of everyone else who's going to an election. Admittedly, that's very funny, but not if I feel like I would feel differently if I was like working on that election and had to like count those ballots, it's going to end up in my book. So like, yes, you should have some barrier for entry in a sense like that. Like, I don't feel like that's a way that like silences or stymies political participation, because if every weird person who can, with like, internet access, can create their own political party, all of a sudden you get this like influx to the point where it actually just is interfering with the smooth mechanics and accessibility of it. So where you put that barrier, that is the difficult question. And I have not really looked at any sort of data to come to an informed decision about that. Like, I feel like, yeah, you should have at least a few members. Like, you don't need to register a political party to run as an independent. And, like, you should at least have a few members. I feel like that's a good sort of introduction, right? Like, if you want to create a micro party that is about a particular issue or a niche focus, right? And you can't get, like, more than, like, 12 people or whatever to sign up and agree to be a member of this party, you're not going to win an election, and you're not doing a good job, really. And like, that should be a good sort of first test to be like, can I actually get people to care and be engaged with this? If not, one, this issue is either not popular enough, or two, I'm just not good enough at connecting or like communicating with the electorate, and therefore I don't, three, have a chance at winning, right? And like, if you learn from that experience and go, okay, well, I only got 12 people to care about this, what have I learned about how I go about this? And well, if you can think of a better way to do it, and then you get 100 and 150, 120 people to sign up, like genuinely sign up, you're like, okay, neat, now we're getting some momentum, and then like learn and build from there. So there should be at least some sort of barrier to party registration, because wait a second, is this membership requirements about joining a political party and not registering a political party? Have I totally wildly... No, yeah, I am talking about the right thing. Never mind. Yes. Captain Cringe, when was the book coming out? The book isn't finished being written yet. I will work on that. I will actually maybe do that tonight after I finish this live stream. How long have I been going for? Have I been doing this for an hour? I've nearly been doing this for an hour. Yeah, so basically, if you want to register a political party, yes, you should have at least some barrier for entry, because if you can't get over that barrier for entry, maybe you just aren't doing politics very well. If that barrier for entry is too high and it discourages and just simply just leads to like the pool of options and political parties like shrinking down into its like, you know, merely a handful, that barrier for entry is too high. And that's just not good for democracy. I don't know how that barrier for entry adjustment of going from 500 to 1500 has affected how many political parties there are. I'm sure there are a couple out there that have been deregistered. I'm not going to say that those parties weren't worthwhile. I just like, I don't have information to comment on it. But as a sort of general vague vibe of like there being requirements, that's my comment. There should be some requirement. What that requirement is, I don't know. That's up to our elected members of Parliament to figure out. And if you don't like it, protest. Contact members of Parliament. Do things to convince others to agree with you. You know, that's all I really want people to do, is to figure out how the system works so that they can feel empowered to engage with it and call for political change that they want to see. What that political change is does not need to align with what I think political change is, right? So, yeah. Wow, and would you look at that? I was about to say I've caught up with all the questions, and then I got another one. Do I think that young people in general are more politically motivated now? If so, do you think this translates to productive participation in the electoral system? We have more young people enrolled than we ever had before, and I think that this is actually an indication of people, and I think that this is in part for multiple things, multiple reasons. Like, one is, I'm going to say TikTok, and not just because I'm on there. Follow me on TikTok, Auspol Explained, obviously. No, but like, basically, like, it will always, forever be, like, unless it's automatic, like, this sort of lag. Like, the graph of, like, you know, people who are enrolled to age is always going to go up, right, when you get older. Like, the proportion of people who are enrolled who are 18 to 25 is never going to be the same as the people who are enrolled to vote 55 to 64, right? And this is in part because like there just needs to be a catalyst. There just needs to be something that makes you care about politics. Like I didn't care about politics when I was 18, right? I know, surprising. And like, you know, eventually you're going to have like, maybe it's like a 30-40 year old, you can like, oh, okay, well, you know, I've voted before, but something has really affected me and now I really get it, now I really care, right? And like young people just haven't had that time to have that catalyst. But right, with the advent of social media, it's a lot easier to have forms of communication that young people would engage with. Like I don't imagine that many 15, 14, 16-year-olds are sitting down every night to watch ABC News, right? And that is where you would get some useful political like journalism and information, right? Like if you did have a 15-year-old watching ABC News all the time, they would actually care about politics, just because osmosis is just gonna get them. It's gonna, you know, the media agenda to care about the thing that's happening around you. Whereas like, you know, the rise of social media, it's easier to just, you know, share and talk about things that interest you and engage in a way that is more tailored to being a young person, as opposed to watching like 50-year-old journalists read from a teleprompter. And, you know, that plus climate change, for example, leads to young people being like, okay, there's a thing that's really going to impact my future. There's lots of people in the sort of spheres that I hang out with that can communicate and talk to me about this. I'm going to care about it, right? And then, you know, with like Greta Thunberg, also then being like, hey, I'm gonna like make news headlines like protesting, that all of a sudden is like, well, now there's some representation. There seems to be actual icons who are doing things. They're going out, they're protesting. There feels a bit more empowering than, you know, you're a teenager, I'm your parent, you know, get off the dang phone and do this. Like it's, you know, you can be like, I dislike the authority that's telling me X, but what am I going to do? And then someone goes, you could do this. And you're like, aha, an outlet for my frustration. So like, yeah, I think that young people are more politically engaged than ever before. And this hopefully does mean that they will enroll to vote and vote. Like I did mention like the climate change as an example. That's not like the only thing that motivates young people. There's lots of other issues, but like when I talk to young people, when I'm sure many people can understand, like when you talk to young people about issues that affect them, or if they care about politics, they will bring up environmental issues more often than not. Well, it depends on their age. Like if they're like, you know, 10 and 11, you're like, oh, what kind of political change would you like to see? And they're like, less school, less homework. And then, you know, once you stop being like 12 and you learn a bit more about the world, you're like, what if we did more about climate change? And you're like, oh, okay. So that is, you know, a very ever-present and very easy to like learn about thing that is a catalyst for political participation and interest. So yes, hi mediocre man, you're more than mediocre to me, you're passable. I don't know, that was not a great compliment. Sorry. I like your username. I'm writing a book. What's it about? It's about weird moments in Australian political history. Obviously, because I love it. You know, like I read history books and then I just find like just an odd thing that happened and I'm like, I need to know more about that. Like, I don't know if it's going to end up in the book. I don't know if it's interesting enough, but like, I'm reading it. It's not there. I'm reading a book about Jack Lang, who was the Premier of New South Wales in the late 20s, early 30s. He's the only Premier to be dismissed. So out of the two uses of the reserve powers in Australia, everyone talks about Gough Whitlam. There's also Jack Lang. And like, you know, it's talking about like, you know, his rise through politics. So, you know, you've got your 1910s, 1920s Labour politics is very very connected to the union and labour movement, and then also because that is to do with workers' rights, there's also off to the side communists who are like, hey, labour is not doing enough, you bourgeois swine. And then there's like this struggle at the labour conferences and union conferences to be like, what do we do about, you know, how do we solidify power and how inclusive do we get? And like Labour at one point being like, you can't be part of the Labour Party if you're part of any other party, to sort of like expel people who were part of the Communist Party of Australia, who also tried to have joint Labour Party membership to try and be like, communism, because Labour actually had an electoral base and the Communists did not. And so I've forgotten where I was going with this. Oh yeah, weird things. So at one point, to be really annoyed by this, a bunch of communists decided to just storm a Labour conference, just like bust down the doors and be like, communism, like literal red wave. Yeah. It's like, what? Like, no one talks about like physically busting into a conference anymore. No one does that anymore. It's just like, that's such a wildly specific thing for like politics. Yeah. Yes. Captain Cringe says that you love how everyone pronounces bourgeois differently. Bourgeois. Anyway. Yes, well, I'm glad that you look forward to reading something that's not 100 years old. I will be talking about things that are more than 100 years old, because it's a history book. Haha, I'm tricking you all to care about history. That's my one thing. History is so interesting, and it's also fascinating. Time is a flat circle. So, Westminster Convention, right? The leader of the government is in the lower house. Government is formed in the lower house, and therefore you find the leader there. So, in the House of Representatives, that's where you find the Prime Minister, right? Except for Asterix at one time with Gordon, I forgot his name, John Gorton, who was a senator briefly. And therefore, like, also, on a state level, you will always find the Premier in the Legislative Assembly, Asterix, right? So the shortest serving Premier of Western Australia, Sir Hal Colbatch, served literally only 30 days in 1919. Look, did you say capital owner thingy? Yes. I thought you said capital owner trilogy. I'm like, buddy, Das Kapital has 4 volumes. Anyway, look, I don't know how to spell bourgeoisie either. That's what autocorrect is for. Where was I? Hal Colbatch. He's a member of the Legislative Council. He's the shortest serving Premier in WA history. He's a member of the Upper House. He was a member of the Upper House the entire time. Unlike Gorton, he did not transition into the Lower House, right? So, 1, defying convention. But 2, like I said, time is a flat circle. So, basically, right, it's 1919. What does he have to do? Well, he has to deal with the Spanish flu, right? And what does he do? He closes the borders. And what's that? There are people who do not like this and people who do like this. Sometimes this move is incredibly popular. Mark McGowan got really well rewarded for closing the WA borders. And there was also some contention with the Commonwealth government because of he's closing the borders and controlling trains. And you know, we had Morrison complaining and trying to sort of be like, here's a lockdown. And so, yeah, you're just seeing sort of these parallels and repeats of like, how do people react to a similar crisis? And yes, once again, we know that states can lock down their borders because not just because of a high court ruling, but also because it's happened before. And then, right, the first time the Queen came to visit, Elizabeth II came in 1954, and she went to Western Australia. And at that point in time, there was a polio epidemic. happening in Western Australia, not in the other states, I don't think. And, well, people were told to socially distance. They didn't use that term, but it was basically stay up, reschedule and reorganize all these like indoor events to be outdoor events or no events. And, well, it's the first time a reigning monarch has come to Australia. It's the first time the new queen has come to Australia, because she's like in her mid-20s. She had her coronation like the year before, right? So people are excited. They're told under strict health orders, don't cram into crowds. What do? They cram into crowds to see her. Humans are just humans, right? Like, every couple of decades, the same things keep happening. And, you know, I just find history so incredibly fascinating because, one, it tells you a thing or two about who we are as people, right? And you also get this sort of, like, appreciation for how we got to where we are now. So, for those who got to see my play, Extraordinary Auspol, my favourite scene, I'm not good with favourites, but like it is one of my favourite scenes, if not my favourite, was a game show where it's the one costume change for me. I put on a bit of a more vibrant vest, I got a microphone, and I'm in the middle like, come on down, our two contestants are two other actors, and I'm asking them questions like, you know, who was the first Prime Minister of Australia? And then like it just gets dark. Like it just veers into like, oh, right? So it's like, when were the first women elected to the federal parliament, which is Dorothy Tangy and Enid Lyons in 1943, right? And then it's like, when did they install women's toilets for members in the Australian federal parliament? 1974, 31 years later. And then it's like, okay, so when did we make same-sex marriage legal, right? And it's like, oh, 2017. When did we get rid of the death penalty? What? Like, when did we get rid of the death penalty? Not just, like, generally, but for, like... Sorry, content warning. Homophobia in the past, right? Like, yeah, when did we get rid of that? 1949 in Victoria was the last state to abolish the death penalty for homosexual activity. And you're like, that's wild. Like, all of a sudden you have this very different understanding of, like, oh, it wasn't just, like, bad. It was bad. Like, it was bad, right? And then, but 1949 is a bit far away. So let's just twist that knife a little bit further, right? And go, okay, so when was the last state to decriminalize homosexuality? Because it was a criminal offence, until, like, the 70s for South Australia, and that was the first place to do it. When was the last? And the answer is Tasmania in 1997. And at that point in time, the audience goes from like, oh, to, oh, like we've had jokes before, and now we have the drop where we go, that's in our lifetime, that's so recent. Like you get this sort of normalization of like what life is like. Like, I was not aware of like the differences in political rights of LGBTQIA plus people when I was 10, right? So I wasn't aware that 2002 was such a significant year for equality reforms in Western Australia, where it was like, finally, gay couples can be recognised as de facto, and like, I was that the year that they got adoption rights in WA? Or maybe that came later. But like there was so much of like, no, can't do that, and then 2002 was like, here is some semblance of like, yeah, you actually legally recognized as having a partner. And then, so there's this like, but you're not married. And so there's that idea of like, well, there's this homophobia and discrimination. It's not like a criminal anymore. It's still not great. And then there's like, and then gay marriage happened. And that's a really simplified idea of history of like, yeah, we've had this big change, and thinking, oh, cool, we've had such a big improvement. But to really put it into context, let's stretch out and just see how incredibly, extremely different it was, and how what we think of like as something that's like, oh, that happened, like that's such an old-fashioned idea, that's super recent. Like, every time I learn a new thing about like history, about like the rights of like women or Indigenous people go, that's so recent. It's like, yes, don't you understand that's all of history? except for the bits that are ancient history, a lot of history is living memory. Like, women got the right, like, Indigenous people got the right to vote in every state and federally. Like some of them earlier, but it finished being a thing by 1965 in Queensland, 1962 in Western Australia, right? And so by 1965, Indigenous people across the entire country can now vote. But the law is still unequal because it isn't compulsory for Indigenous people until 1984, which means that it's effectively discouraging them. It's effectively going, yeah, you can, but we don't care if you do, right? Whereas everyone else actually has this sort of impetus and onus and requirement to do so. Therefore, those voices are highlighted and targeted because, you know, the voices of the people who have to vote versus the voices of people who might vote, who do you think the politicians are going to focus on? So there is this sort of, it's like, some people might think, you know, oh yeah, optional, that would be great. But like, if you're the optional one and everyone else has to do it, you're not being encouraged, right? You're like, and therefore you get this disproportionate just like lack of enrollment for Indigenous people. 1984, was it 86? It was 84, right? That's now, only now, 40 years ago, right? Right? Yes. So, and like women, for example, depending on which state you're in, could be in a jury in like the 50s? 40s? I don't know. When did they introduce it? I think they introduced it in Western Australia in like the 50s, right? Like it was an optional thing, but then it's only like the 70s or 80s. I think like it was like the 80s where it's like women actually, just like everyone else, have to be on juries if called, right? Like there's this idea of like, yes, I guess women can do these things technically. We've finally been convinced that women belong elsewhere other than the kitchen, but we're in no way going to structure this system to treat them equally or value or highlight their voices or opinions in any way that is equal to another. And people go, that's so recent. And you're like, that's what so much of history is. And I'm soft palating it so you can swallow it through comedy sandwich, and then all of a sudden I'm like, pow! What, surprise! All the things that you think are normal happened in the past, like, 5 to 40 years max. Like, and some things that you think are normal actually haven't happened yet. Like, I don't know. Anyway, so yes, I went on a little bit, but yes, Fiona, my play is only in Western Australia. It has no plans to tour. Like, I don't know if it'll have the audience. It's so hard to like market these things. So yeah, no plans to tour it yet. Sorry. It'd be nice maybe if we could prove that it would actually sell tickets, but I don't know. It's one of those difficult things. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, history, right? It's fun at times. It's interesting. And you also get to learn some not fun things. Every time I learn more about the history of Indigenous people in Australia, well, the colonial onwards history, like history of pre-colonial Indigenous people, you're like, that is so interesting and cool. Like, there are like oral traditions that have like encoded and embedded and preserved like knowledge about geological shifts from over 10,000 years ago, or even like 30,000 plus years ago, like embedded in oral tradition. I'm like, that is so cool. And then you get to like colonial politics, and like I was literally reading today a royal commission into the treatment of Indigenous people in Western Australia in like in 1905. And you're like, oh no, oh. Western Australia didn't let Indigenous people have mining rights until the 70s. They didn't let Indigenous people profit from the gold under their feet. If an Indigenous person found gold in Kalgoorlie, they got a white person to apply for the miner's right and then worked for them, and then also legally were not counted as the same way in terms of labour. And maybe they got paid, but legally, until I think the 30s or 40s, legally you could not pay an Indigenous person the same amount as a white person in Western Australia. You couldn't. it wasn't just like you could get away with paying them less. It was like you're not allowed to treat their labor as equal to white person labor. A system that, while wages eventually became equal, a system of their labor does not count in the same way, persisted until the 70s. Literally, end of last year, in like December, the current government of West Australia had a historic apology for stolen and underpaid wages for Indigenous people from like the early 1900s all the way to the 1970s. And I feel like this is somewhat important. I feel like you would care more about politics if you knew more about history, because you could see how it was really messed up in the past, how recent that was, and how people finally figured out how to be like, no, that's not okay, and changed it. So if you think there's some sort of inertia or like difficulty in political change, that's because, yes, that is the constant thing of all of history. And if you want to change something, it's going to take you a while. Please don't be discouraged about that, because if you also look at history, you will also see how things do change. We are not stuck in any particular system. It's just that everything has friction and inertia. Oh, okay. Anyway, there's more. Yes, there's more questions and things. What made me get into YouTube? The answer is people kept asking me the same questions, and I was like, what if there was some sort of easy to like Google online resource? Like someone's like, how does voting work? And I'm like, let me tell you, right? And so that's what I did. And then I was like, how? Yeah, it's literally just like, I felt that this was the easiest way to create like a body of work that people could look at and go, aha, I have a question about how something works. I'm going to look it up. Oh, look, this person has answered this question for me in a way that is interesting and engaging and not boring text. The thing is that I've literally forgotten what I was going to say. I've literally forgot. Oh, that's it. The problem is that when I look into things, like I'm learning new things all the time myself because I find it fascinating. I really want to understand it like more, and so like a lot of my old episodes are just overly detailed in ways that are not interesting or worthwhile. So yeah, like, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the comments. Yeah, where was I? Yeah, so like, let's take elections, for example. Like if I was to explain to you how an election worked, like I could give you a basic summary and you would feel like you understood it good enough, pretty well, and that's all you really needed. So like, you know, an election, a federal election, there's two chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate, and you vote using preferential voting. Now in the House of Representatives, one person represents your area. There's 150 areas called electorates, and political parties and independents run in those areas. If a political party or coalition of parties wins more than half of those areas, they get to form the government, right? Whereas the Senate, well, you are electing 6, usually, senators for a state, and that's across the entire state, and 2 if you live in the ACT or the Northern Territory. And we use preferences. So you rank candidates from most like to least like, right? And for the House of Representatives, to win, you need more than half the votes. To win in the Senate, you need to have a quota, which is a proportion of those seats, which is like 1/7 of the total, right? And so, like, the least popular people get knocked out and their preferences get redistributed until you find people who get enough votes to get elected, and then they represent you, right? And then bills have to pass through both chambers to become a law. You understand elections, right? That's both the mechanics, the function and reasoning of them to create a system where we have multiple representatives to examine and scrutinize bills and represent different political views across the nation. Do you know what a division returning officer is? Right? What happens if there is a tie? Right? What is an issue of a writ? Like, these are additional that I have, and I go and look for them, right? And I find it really frustrating sometimes when the explanation of how to vote on like an electoral commission website is not more detailed. Like, there have been times where I'm making like, this is how you vote for a state election. And it just kind of gives you a general vibe of like, there will be grouped candidates and ungrouped candidates. And, you preferences. And I'm like, okay, wait, so what's the definition of an ungrouped? How do you become a grouped candidate? Like, I don't want to make any sort of false assumptions, but I also want to explain this in a way that's absolutely clear. So I want to know more detail. And so, like, I am learning ultimately way more than is necessary to explain something so simple. And so the constant struggle for me is to be like, this is not interesting. You are allowed to cut this information. Yeah. Raymond asks, how big is the highest court in Australia? The High Court in Canberra is... Good question. I don't know. I don't know how many judges there are. It's not like in America where, like, you can only do X... You can only have, like, so many people. How many High Court judges are there? Okay, there's 7 justices. Actually, is that a legislative limit? No, I mean, look, there's a constitutional minimum for how many High Court justices are, but I'm pretty sure that like the Constitution says that you can increase them as legislation in the Parliament prescribes. So I don't know what the maximum is. I also don't know how big. I think the High Court building looks ugly. If you look up the High Court of Australia building, it's not very pretty. At the front, you're like, oh, okay. But then you look at the back, and you're like, what is this modernist weird... What's with all these panels? Anyway, look, I've been talking for nearly an hour and a half straight. So I am going to wrap up soon, right? And yes, I just want to say at this point, thank you all so much for watching and listening to me ramble on, because I love rambling on, right? And yeah, as always, share, this, as people said, this is a criminally small YouTube channel. Please help me grow this channel. If you have lots of followers on some sort of social media platform, feel free to tell them. Be like, if you're on TikTok, be like, hey, here's my top 3 list of content creators that are criminally underrated and you should check them out. 1, Auspol Explained, because of the following reasons. 2, literally anyone else. I don't know who you like. Gabby Bolt. I wouldn't say she's criminally underrated. She's underrated? What am I saying? What? She's pretty popular. She's also pretty good and fun. Anyway, yes. Number 3. Steve from down the road. Yes, so, yeah. Do not harass friendly Geordies to shout me out. Don't do that. But yeah. It's like, oh, I'd love to collab with some people, but it's also like, I cannot have myself associated with you. Otherwise, it just will undermine the neutrality vibe. Like, in no way does my content work or gel with them in any way, and it just would not seem... it would be so inappropriate to try and collab with them. So, yeah, it's just like, hey, who wants to collab? Not you, though. You're too political. When YouTube was tiny and you just enjoyed like the same 12 British YouTubers who like all knew each other and just would guest star in each other's vlogs and skits. Can't do that. Simply found myself too separate of a niche for the rest of the Australian. Final question, and then I'm going to go. So please stop asking me questions. Raymond asks, how do political parties choose who they are going to run? A thing called pre-selection. So there are various political parties like Labour, Liberal, Greens, One Nation, etc., right? And you can be a member of these parties right? You can, like, usually there's a membership fee and an application, and you can be like, I'd like to be a member, right? Being a member is not the same as like being a politician. So there's like members of parliament who are members of political parties, but there are so many more people involved in the backdrop, right? So, you know, a political party wants to run a candidate in your area, right? So let's say Labour is like, I want a candidate who is going to run in this seat. I want someone with a good public profile who's going to do a good job of defeating the incumbent Liberal, National, or Greens member or whatever, right? How do you decide who is good? Well, you have a vote, a little pre-selection vote, right? Where some people go, well, I want, you know, this person to be our candidate. You know, like, this person's been a member of this political party and helped in so many campaigns, and they volunteer for a bunch of organizations. People know who this person is. And some people go like, oh, but like, I think this person would be good for X, Y, and Z reason, right? And then there's a little miniature poll, basically, where only members of that party who have membership get to vote. And then they find someone to pre-select. They have pre-selected ahead of time to be like, this is the person. And then, you know, basically all the various parties do that. And then the public gets to go, oh, okay, well, now I've been presented with a bunch of options. Who do I want to select, right? And so one way to influence political parties, be part of discussions and put forward ideas in whatever capacity suits you. And then, right, like, when pre-selection happens, you know, you could be presented with two options, one of which is more aligned with, like, who you think and what ideas you think should be representative of the party, versus someone who is slightly different aligned. Like, political parties are not monoliths, so you know, like, in different parties you'll have like the more of a right faction or left faction, right? And you know, there'll be factional battles where people are trying to get more people from one faction to sign up and vote for this pre-selection person, blah 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 blah. Internal party politics, whatever, right? So you can be like, oh, I think person who is more left or right leaning within the scope of this party, wherever it is on the political spectrum, I think they should be better, right? And so you can have these eventual like ideological shifts throughout the party as like the people who comprise it and the people who vote for who actually makes it up in Parliament shift over time. And that way, you know, that's how we get different candidates, and that's how parties become a sort of collection of different views and perspectives, is that they have to begin with, ask a bunch of different people what views and perspectives they should be being put forward before they even make it to the general public. So, yeah, join a political party if you feel like it. Whatever political party you so feel like, or create your own. That's also an option. Or support an independent, you know. But yeah. Neat. Well, like I said, final question. So, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I will stop watching. I will stop talking now, pretty much. It's been an hour and a half. I'm going to just, you know, do various things. I'm gonna start working on dinner before my wife arrives home, so she can come home to a nice warm dinner when she gets home from work, because she's working very hard. Okay, so oh well, thank you for tuning in at the very end. There's always one person who comes in at the very end. Thank you so much, Spare Channel. Pardon me. Yeah, I think it's about time. My voice is getting a bit rough. Oh, the spectre of age. I turned 32 in like 2.5 months. Neat. Still got carded the other week at a bolo. Feeling good, but I don't care. I actually don't want to look like a child, because that would be weird. People would respect me less. So, yeah. I do have like a grey hair here and here, but to be fair, I've had those for like forever. Anyway, so thanks for tuning in, everyone. Have fun. Engage in politics. Don't just share this channel. Share your political views with other people. have discussions, maybe learn things about other people's political views, and collectively we shape the world and society that we live in. That's how it works. Anyway, I'll see you next time. And also, just a quick note, my latest long form video, I guess nothing of it does really well in December, but like it was about the William Lyne, who almost became the first Prime Minister of Australia, and it's underperformed terribly. Oh my goodness, please. I think it's a very good video. I think it's very fun and amusing. Good form of storytelling and making like this dull technical thing about the birth of Australia as a single nation, like actually very entertaining. I put a lot of effort in it, as opposed to videos that I put less effort in, and they've done a lot better. So if you please just watch and share that. Anyway, thank you, Joel Anderson, for watching it, and thank you for the very early birthday wishes. Look, if I could get 15,000 subscribers by March 21st, that would be a great birthday present. Okay. For real. No cap. I'm going to go now. Goodbye, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your night and evening. So, goodbye. 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 Okay. I never know, like, how long...